Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Dr. Nurulda Adabiah binti Mustafa, and will be delivering a lecture on concept of human rights and its legal instruments that includes human rights issues happening around the globe. There are two learning outcomes expected from students. Well, at the end of the lecture, the students must be able to explain the concept of human rights and, secondly, describe the main instruments regarding human rights under international law. This lecture has 5 subtopics concerning on the definition of human rights, the origin of human rights, the basic principles of human rights, and the development of international human rights instruments and a violation of human rights. So basically, these are the 5 elements, forming the structure of the lecture. Okay, what is human rights? So human rights are commonly understood as being those rights which are inherent to the human being. It acknowledges that every single human being is entitled to enjoy his or her human rights without distinction as to race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Human rights are legally guaranteed by human rights law, protecting individuals and groups against actions that interfere with fundamental freedoms and human dignity. Right, there is a video that you can watch pertaining to the definition of universal human rights, which you can access in YouTube. So, where does human rights originated? So the concept of human rights originated from various sources, be it civilization and culture, religion, as well as the law. Right? So for example, in the Cyrus Cylinder, the first charter of right of nations in the world. And we have these religion, where the Quran, the Hindu Vedas, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, the Bible, and the Analects of Confucius are 5 of the oldest written sources which address questions of people's rights and responsibilities. And with regards to law, there are various perspectives of law that also discusses on human rights. And one of it would be the natural law theory. Okay. So there are various documents asserting individual rights which are considered as the written precursors to many of today's human rights instruments, such as the Magna Carta in 1215, the English Bill of Rights in 1689, the French Declaration on the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, and the U.S. Constitutions and Bill of Rights in 1791. So these are the written precursors to many of today's human rights instruments. So you can also watch a video with regards to the story of human rights, which you can access through YouTube. So what are the characters of human rights, or what are the characteristics of human rights? Okay, according to the United Nations Charter 1945, it states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So basically, human rights are founded on respect for the dignity and worth of each person. Secondly, human rights are universal, meaning that they are applied equally and without discrimination to all people. Thirdly, human rights are inalienable in that no one can have his or her human rights taken away other than in specific situations. And fourthly, human rights are indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent for the reason that it is insufficient to respect some human rights and not others. There are 3 main categories of human rights that we are going to cover in this lecture. The first one refers to the civil and political rights. So what is civil and political rights? Well, it derived from natural rights philosophy. It is called as fundamental rights or first generation of rights. For example, freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, freedom of speech and religion, freedom of movement and assembly, guarantees against discrimination, slavery, torture, etc. Secondly, refers to economic and cultural rights. So what is economic and cultural rights? It is known as second generation of rights, where positive rights or rights that required active state intervention for their protection. For example, right to work, right to education, right to access to health care, and etc. And the third one will be the people's rights. So it's also known as third generation of rights. This category advocated by the developing countries. For example, right to development, right to healthy environment, right to peace, and right to self-determination. So there are various international instruments that govern human rights. So basically, this lecture will introduce you some of the basic human rights legal instruments. First, the United Nations Charter. In the United Nations Charter 1945, the preamble states that it reaffirms faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. Article 1, Clause 3 of the United Nations Charter provides the promotion of and respect of human rights as a purpose of the UN and its members. Article 55, paragraph C further provides that the UN or the United Nations shall promote universal respect and observance of human rights and fundamental freedom for all. And Article 56 provides that member states of the United Nations pledge to promote respect for the human rights of all. Secondly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, better known as UDHR. It is an international document which states the basic rights and the fundamental freedom to which all human beings are entitled. So basically, the history with regards to UDHR, the United Nations established a Commission on Human Rights and charged it with drafting a document spelling out the meaning of the fundamental rights and freedoms proclaimed in the Charter. Eleanor Roosevelt guides it. So on December 10, 1948, the UDHR was adopted by 56 members of the United Nations. It consists of 30 articles that consist of two main categories of human rights, the civil and political rights, and secondly, economic, social, and cultural rights. So generally, the UDHR proclaims that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. All right. So basically, the UDHR is not a treaty and not legally binding. During the drafting of the UDHR, it was stated that it is not and does not purport to be a statement of law or legal obligation. It is instead a common standard of achievement for all peoples of all nations. It merely lists of human rights which member states pledge themselves to promote under Article 5 and Article 56 of the Charter. UDHR is of great importance in stimulating and promoting the international protection of human rights. It gives implications that shape the subsequent treaties of human rights and content of constitutions of new states. Because UDHR has no binding legal force, the rights and freedoms set out more precisely in two International Covenant on Human Rights of 1966 that we are going to look after this. So you can watch a video on YouTube with regards to the UDHR. Right, the third international instruments governing the human rights is the United Nations Covenants on Human Rights, ICCPR, all right, as well as the ICESCR, right? So human rights in 1948, UDHR did inspire the adoption of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, and Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. So these two instruments, which were adopted in 1966, came into force in 1976. These are the multilateral treaties that have been ratified by the majority of the United Nations members, where all the rights mentioned, if they are accepted without reservation, are binding upon state parties. So basically, the ICCPR incorporates the civil and political rights provisions of the UDHR, while the ICESCR incorporates the economic, social, and cultural rights provisions of the UDHR. Okay, with regards to ICCPR, it provides, among others, the right of self-determination, the right to life, the prohibition of torture, prohibition of slavery and forced labor, the right to liberty, freedom of thought, religion, expression, the right of peaceful assembly, etc. Well, as of September 2019, the covenant has 173 parties and 6 more signatories without ratification. With regards to ICESCR, it provides labor rights and the right to health, the right to education, and the right to an adequate standard of living. As of January 2020, the covenant has 170 parties. A further 4 countries, including the United States, have signed but not ratified the covenant. All right, now we move on to the fourth, to the other core international human rights instruments that we have. Yeah, for example, we have the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948. We have also the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, in 1979. Seventh, we have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC 1989, and Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So these are the conventions that I mentioned just now. It's basically conventions or international instruments that have been ratified by Malaysia. Right. Now we move on to how does these human rights are being enforced. So basically, global actors and individuals are morally obligated to take action in protecting human rights. It is the role of everyone. So first, by way of sanction. What is sanction? So it is a punishment to force a country to obey international law by limiting or stopping from having a relationship with the government in terms of economic, diplomatic, and culture. It is a unilateral and multilateral sanction. All right. For example, we have the political sanction, the United States sanction against Venezuela, for example, and we also have economic sanction. For example, UNSC, the United Nations Security Commission against Iraq, Somalia, Rwanda, Republic of Yugoslavia, and so on and so forth. Secondly, human rights can also be enforced by way of humanitarian intervention. So what is humanitarian intervention? It refers to collective global responsibility. It is an intervention on the ground of humanity by the way, by the use of military force to help a human being. Right, by deploying military forces to prevent or stop violations of human rights. We also refer it as humanitarian relief. For example, the United Nations Humanitarian Intervention in Sierra Leone, UNAMSIL, NATO Humanitarian Intervention in Kosovo, etc. Okay. The third way in enforcing human rights by way of the court, the International Criminal Court, ICC. All right. ICC bring the violators of human rights to justice, regardless where they committed their crimes. Right. For example, War Crime Tribunal with regards to Nuremberg and Tokyo Tribunal. And the fourth way of enforcing human rights by way of non-state actors. For example, we have the United Nations, we have the Human Rights Council, we have UNICEF, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, War Child Project, etc. So basically, these are the things that you are covering under this topic. So happy learning and good luck. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.